Alaska, land of endless winter nights and freezing winds that cut through your soul. But what happens when you're stationed at a military base where the cold isn't the only thing trying to kill you? I spent 3 years at various military installations across Alaska. What I witnessed there still keeps me awake at night. These aren't stories you'll find in any official reports. The military has ways of making things disappear, just like they made some of my friends disappear. Tonight, I'm breaking my silence. These are 5 horror stories from the most isolated military bases in Alaska. Stories about things that shouldn't exist, about soldiers who vanished without a trace, about sounds in the ice that don't come from any living thing. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Tell me if you've ever been stationed somewhere that felt wrong. And stick around to the end, because the last story will change how you think about what's really hiding in Alaska's frozen wilderness. Trust me when I say this. Some secrets are buried in ice for a reason. Let's begin. The thing in Hangar 7-1000. I was cleaning Hangar 7 at Elmendorf Air Force Base when I found the scratches. Deep gouges in the concrete floor, like something with claws, had been dragging itself across the ground. The scratches led from the main door all the way to the back corner, where they just stopped. That's when I heard the breathing. Not human breathing, something slower, deeper, like whatever was making that sound had lungs the size of car tires. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound. The beam shook in my hands as I pointed it toward the darkest corner of the hangar. 2 yellow eyes stared back at me, eyes that belonged to something that should not exist. I ran. I ran so fast that I didn't stop until I reached the main building. But those eyes, they followed me home that night. In my dreams, in my mirror, in every dark corner I passed. My name is Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, and I was stationed at Elmendorf from 2019 to 2022. I worked night maintenance on the aircraft hangars. It was a quiet job, most of the time. Elmendorf sits right outside Anchorage, but at night, it might as well be on another planet. The base gets dark, really dark. The kind of dark that makes you question what's real and what's just your mind playing tricks. Hangar 7 was always my least favorite assignment. It was older than the other hangars, built back in the 1952nd. The lights flickered constantly, and there was always this smell, like a wet dog mixed with something rotting. The other guys on my crew called it the dead hangar because nothing good ever happened there. But that night in January 2021, I was assigned to clean it alone. My supervisor, Sergeant Martinez, had called in sick. So it was just me, my mop bucket, and whatever was lurking in the shadows. I should mention that weird things had been happening at Elmendorf for months. Tools going missing. Strange sounds coming from empty buildings. 3 soldiers had been found sleepwalking outside the base perimeter, with no memory of how they got there. The brass kept telling us it was the cold messing with our heads. Cabin fever. Too much isolation. But I knew better. We all knew better. Something was wrong at Elmendorf. Something was hunting us. I started cleaning at 11 p.m., just like always. The hangar was empty, except for one old cargo plane that hadn't flown in years. They kept it there for parts, they said, but I always wondered why they never just scrapped it. The first hour went normally. I mopped the floors, wiped down the workbenches, and checked the inventory. Standard stuff. But around midnight, that's when things got weird. I was cleaning near the back of the hangar when my mop hit something sticky. I shined my flashlight down and saw a dark stain on the concrete. It looked like blood, but it was too thick, too black, and it was still wet. I followed the stain with my light, and that's when I saw the scratches. Long, deep gouges in the floor, like someone had dragged a rake across the concrete. Except these scratches were too big for any tool I knew. Each mark was about 6 inches long and an inch deep. I bent down to get a closer look and noticed something else. The scratches had a pattern to them. 4 parallel lines, spaced exactly like claws. Big claws. The kind that belonged to something with paws the size of dinner plates. That's when I heard the first sound. A low rumble, like a generator starting up. But there was no generator in Hangar 7. I stood up and listened. The sound was coming from somewhere near the old cargo plane. I should have left then. I should have called security and let them deal with it. But curiosity got the better of me. I followed the sound, step by careful step, toward the back of the hangar. The rumbling got louder as I got closer. And then I realized what I was hearing. It wasn't a machine at all. It was breathing. Deep, slow breathing, like something massive was taking its time with each breath. My hands started shaking. The flashlight beam danced across the walls as I tried to steady myself. Whatever was making that sound was big, and it was alive. I crept toward the cargo plane, trying to keep my footsteps quiet. The breathing sound was definitely coming from inside the aircraft. The rear cargo door was cracked open just enough for something to slip through. I raised my flashlight and peered through the crack. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, slowly, 2 yellow eyes opened in the back of the plane. They were huge, each one the size of a softball, and they were looking right at me. The thing behind those eyes let out a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a growl, not quite a howl, something in between that made my blood freeze. It was the sound a predator makes when it's about to strike. I stumbled backward and fell onto the concrete. My flashlight went flying and shattered against the wall. The hangar went pitch black, but those yellow eyes kept glowing in the darkness, getting bigger as whatever owned them started moving toward me. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to grab my equipment. I just ran as fast as my legs would carry me, all the way to the security office. When I told the guards what happened, they looked at me like I was crazy. They sent 2 men to check Hangar 7, but they found nothing. No scratches, no blood, no signs that anything had been there at all. But I know what I saw, and the next morning, I put in for a transfer. I couldn't stay on that base another day, knowing that thing was out there. 6 months later, I heard that Hangar 7 had been sealed off. Structural problems, they said. But I think I know the real reason. Some things are too dangerous to let loose, even if nobody wants to admit they exist. I never found out what happened to that creature, but sometimes, late at night, I still see those yellow eyes in my dreams. I found Private Jackson buried in the snow behind Building 12 at Fort Wainwright. At first, I thought he was dead. His skin was blue-white, his eyes were frozen shut, and there was no pulse. But when I called for the medics, Jackson sat up in the snow and asked me what time it was. He had been missing for 3 days. The temperature had been 40 below zero the entire time. No human being could survive that. But Jackson was walking and talking like nothing had happened. That's when I noticed his shadow was missing. I looked down at the snow where Jackson was standing. The morning sun was bright, and everything around us cast clear shadows. The trees, the buildings, even the birds flying overhead. But where Jackson stood, there was no shadow at all, just white snow. I knew right then that whatever came back wasn't Private Jackson. It was something else wearing his face. I'm Master Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, and I served at Fort Wainwright from 2020 to 2023. Fort Wainwright is about as isolated as military bases get. It sits outside Fairbanks, surrounded by thousands of miles of frozen wilderness. Private Tommy Jackson was one of my soldiers. Good kid, 22 years old, from Texas. He'd never seen snow before Alaska, and the cold hit him hard. But he was tough, and he learned fast. Jackson went missing on a Wednesday morning in February 2022. He was supposed to be on guard duty at the main gate, but when the next shift arrived, his post was empty. His rifle was still there, his radio was still working, but Jackson was gone. We launched a full search immediately. 40 soldiers, 3 helicopters, and search dogs. But Alaska is big, and when someone disappears in the wilderness, they don't usually come back, especially not in February, when the temperature drops to 50 below and the wind can freeze your lungs in minutes. We searched for 3 days. On the third night, the commander called off the search. We figured Jackson had gotten lost in the woods and frozen to death. It happens more than you'd think, but then I found him. It was Saturday morning, and I was doing my usual rounds. I always checked behind the buildings for anything out of place. Broken windows, damaged equipment, signs of intruders, routine stuff. Building 12 housed our communications equipment. It was important, so I checked it twice a day. As I walked around the back, something caught my eye. A dark shape in the snow, about 20 feet from the building. I walked over to investigate, and that's when I saw it was a person, buried face down in a snowdrift, wearing army fatigues. I could see the name tape on the back of his jacket. Jackson. My heart started pounding. I called out his name, but he didn't respond. I ran over and started digging him out of the snow. His body was completely frozen, stiff as a board. I checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. I grabbed my radio to call for help. But before I could speak, Jackson's eyes snapped open. Bright blue eyes, staring right at me. He blinked twice, then sat up in the snow like he was waking up from a nap. "Sergeant Rodriguez?" he said. His voice sounded normal, but there was something off about it. Too calm, too steady, like he was reading from a script. "Jackson, what the hell happened to you?" I asked. "You've been missing for 3 days." He looked around, confused. 3 days? It feels like I just closed my eyes for a minute. He stood up and brushed the snow off his uniform. That's when I should have noticed there was no snow sticking to him. The flakes just fell right through him like he wasn't really there. But I was too shocked to pay attention to details. I was just happy to find him alive. "Jackson, you need to get to the medical clinic right now," I told him. "You've been exposed to freezing temperatures for 3 days. You should be dead." He smiled, but it wasn't Jackson's smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. "I feel fine, Sergeant. Never felt better." That's when I looked down and noticed his shadow was missing. The sun was shining directly on him, but the snow beneath his feet showed no dark outline, nothing at all. I took a step back. "Jackson, look at the ground. Where's your shadow?" He looked down, and for just a second, his face changed. His features shifted, like they were made of melting wax. Then everything snapped back to normal. "I don't know what you mean, Sergeant," he said. But his voice had changed too. It was deeper now, with an echo that seemed to come from somewhere far away. I grabbed my radio and called for backup. "Security to Building 12. I need assistance immediately." Jackson, or whatever was wearing Jackson's face, took a step toward me. "Sergeant, you look upset. Is something wrong?" "Stay where you are." I pulled out my sidearm and pointed it at him. "Don't move." He stopped, but kept smiling that terrible smile. "You can't hurt me, Sergeant. I'm already dead." Security arrived 2 minutes later. When they got there, Jackson was acting completely normal. Confused about why I had my weapon drawn, asking what was wrong. He even had a shadow again. The medics checked him out and found nothing unusual. His body temperature was normal. His vital signs were perfect. Better than perfect, actually. It was like he was in the best health of his life. They sent him back to duty the next day. But I kept watching him. And over the next few weeks, I noticed things. Jackson never blinked. He never got cold, even when it was 60 below. And sometimes, when he thought nobody was looking, his reflection would disappear from windows and mirrors. I applied for a transfer a month later. I couldn't stay on the same base with that thing. The voice came from 50 feet underground, echoing through the abandoned bunker at Clear Air Force Station. It was calling my name, over and over again, in a voice that sounded exactly like my dead father. "David, David, come find me, son." I knew it was impossible. My father had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, 2,000 miles away in Oregon, but that voice, it was definitely his. The same deep rumble, the same way he said my name when I was in trouble as a kid. I was supposed to be doing a routine inspection of the old bunker system, just checking for structural damage and making sure everything was sealed properly. But nobody had told me about the voice. Nobody had told me that some of the soldiers who went down there never came back up. At least, not the same way they went down. I should have left immediately. Instead, I followed the voice deeper into the darkness. I'm Technical Sergeant David Park, and I spent 2 years at Clear Air Force Station. From 2021 to 2023. Clear is one of the most remote bases in Alaska, about 100 miles south of Fairbanks. It's so isolated that we only get supply runs twice a month. The base was built during the Cold War to monitor Soviet aircraft. Most of it was underground, a massive network of bunkers and tunnels carved right into the permafrost. By the time I got there, half the facility was abandoned. Too expensive to maintain, they said. My job was facility maintenance. I kept the active parts of the base running and occasionally checked on the abandoned sections to make sure they weren't collapsing or flooding. It was boring work, but I liked the solitude. The old bunkers were off limits to most personnel. Only a few of us had access, and we were supposed to go down in pairs. But staffing was always short at Clear, so most of the time, I went alone. I should have paid attention to the stories the other guys told, about voices in the tunnels, about soldiers who went missing during inspections. But I figured it was just talk. Bored guys making up ghost stories to pass the time. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I first heard the voice. I was checking bunker level C, about 40 feet underground. The air was stale and cold, and my flashlight kept flickering. Standard conditions for the old sections. I was examining a crack in the concrete wall when I heard it, faint at first, like someone whispering in the distance. I stopped and listened, but the sound faded away. I continued my inspection, but a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. A man's voice, calling from somewhere deeper in the bunker. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone down here?" No answer. But then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps echoing through the tunnels. They seemed to be coming from level D, which had been sealed off for years. I grabbed my radio to call for backup, but I was too deep underground. No signal. I was on my own. The smart thing would have been to leave and come back with another person. But the footsteps had stopped, and everything was quiet again. I convinced myself I was just hearing things. The mind plays tricks when you're alone in dark places. I finished my inspection of level C and started heading back to the surface. But as I passed the entrance to level D, I heard the voice again, and this time it was calling my name. David. I froze. The voice was coming from behind the sealed door to level D. But that was impossible. Nobody had been down there in years. "David, come find me, son." My blood went cold. That voice. I knew that voice. It was my father's voice, but my father was dead. "Don't leave me again, David. Stay with me forever." I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the sealed door to level D. The voice kept calling my name, getting more urgent each time. "David, I need your help. I'm lost down here. I can't find my way out." Against every instinct I had, I found myself reaching for the door handle. The seal had been broken. The door was unlocked. It opened with a loud creak that echoed through the tunnels. Level D was pitch black. My flashlight beam only penetrated about 10 feet into the darkness, but I could hear movement there. Footsteps, getting closer. "Dad?" I called out. I knew it was crazy, but the voice was so real, so familiar. "I'm here, son. Just keep walking straight. You'll find me." I took a step into level D, then another. The air was different down there, thicker. It smelled like earth and decay. My flashlight flickered and died. In the complete darkness, I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Heavy, ragged breathing, like someone who had been running for miles. It was coming from right in front of me. I fumbled for my backup light and clicked it on. There was nothing there, just an empty tunnel stretching into blackness, but the breathing continued. And then I heard something that made me run. My father's voice, but wrong somehow, distorted, like it was coming through water. I turned and ran back toward the entrance, but the tunnel seemed longer than before. It took forever to reach the door. When I finally made it out, I slammed it shut and ran all the way to the surface. I never went back to level D, and 2 weeks later, I requested a transfer off the base. Some things are better left buried. The security cameras at Eielson Air Force Base showed me something that shouldn't exist. At 3:47 a.m., Camera 12 picked up a figure walking across the flight line. A tall, thin figure in an old military uniform that hadn't been used since World War II. The figure walked directly through a chain-link fence like it wasn't there. Then, it turned and looked straight into the camera. Its face was completely black, except for 2 white points where its eyes should have been. The next morning, we found Airman First Class Martinez dead in his dorm room. No signs of trauma, no cause of death, just dead, with the same terrified expression I'd seen on 3 other faces in the past month. I'm Senior Airman Jake Thompson, and I worked security at Eielson Air Force Base from 2022 to 2023. Eielson is about 26 miles southeast of Fairbanks, and it's home to some of our most advanced aircraft, which means security is tight, very tight. My job was monitoring the security cameras during the night shift. 12 cameras covering the entire base perimeter, plus another 8 inside the main buildings. Most nights were quiet. The biggest excitement we usually got was a moose wandering onto the runway. But in September 2022, things started getting weird. We had 4 unexplained deaths in 6 weeks. All young airmen, all healthy, all found dead in their beds with no obvious cause. The medical examiner said their hearts just stopped, but they all had the same look on their faces when we found them. Pure terror. The base commander brought in investigators from outside. They interviewed everyone, checked all our procedures, even brought in experts to test for gas leaks or other environmental hazards. They found nothing. That's when I started paying closer attention to the security cameras. If something was killing our people, maybe I could catch it on video. The first time I saw the figure, I thought it was just a glitch in the camera system. Camera 12 covered the northeast section of the flight line, and at exactly 3:47 a.m., a dark shape appeared on the screen. At first, it looked like a shadow moving across the tarmac. But shadows don't move independently, and they don't have the shape of a person walking upright. I zoomed in on the figure and increased the image brightness. What I saw made my hands shake. It was definitely a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall, maybe 7 feet. Too thin, like it was stretched out. And it was wearing what looked like an old military uniform from the 1942nd. The figure walked with purpose, heading straight for the main hangar. But between it and the hangar was a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I watched the figure approach the fence and expected it to stop or climb over. Instead, it walked right through the fence like it wasn't there. I grabbed my radio to call for backup, but before I could speak, the figure stopped walking and turned toward the camera. Even through the grainy black and white image, I could see its face clearly. There was no face, just a black void where features should have been, except for 2 bright white points where its eyes would be. Those white points seemed to be looking directly at me through the camera. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was like the thing could see me watching it, like it knew exactly where I was sitting in the security office, 2 miles away. The figure stood there for about 10 seconds, staring into the camera. Then it turned and continued walking toward the hangar. I watched it disappear around the corner of the building. I immediately called the patrol unit to check the hangar area. 2 security guards responded within 5 minutes, but they found nothing. No signs of intrusion, no footprints in the snow, nothing. But when they reviewed the security footage with me, the figure was clearly visible on the recording, walking through a fence that was definitely solid steel, staring into a camera with eyes that weren't there. "What the hell is that thing?" asked Sergeant Williams, the patrol leader. "I don't know," I said, "but I think it's connected to the deaths." We were right. The next morning, we found Airman Martinez dead in his dorm room, room 247, which was directly behind the hangar where the figure had disappeared. I started reviewing all the security footage from the previous months, looking for other appearances of the figure. I found them. 4 other times, always at 3:47 a.m., always walking toward the dorm buildings, and always, the next morning, we found a body. The pattern was clear. This thing, whatever it was hunting our people. And the security cameras were the only way to track it. I tried to tell my superiors, but nobody wanted to hear about ghosts on military footage. They said I was stressed out from too many night shifts. They offered me counseling and suggested I take some leave. Instead, I put in for a transfer. I wasn't going to wait around to see if that thing decided I was next on its list. 6 months after I left Eielson, I heard they had shut down the night security program. All monitoring was now done remotely from Elmendorf Air Force Base, 40 miles away. They said it was for efficiency, but I think I know the real reason. Some things are too dangerous to watch up close. The temperature in storage room B7 at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson was always exactly 32 degrees. Not 31, not 33. Exactly 32 degrees, even when the heating system was broken and the rest of the building was over 80 degrees. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was what happened to anyone who stayed in that room for more than 10 minutes. They came out different, changed, like something had crawled inside their head and made itself at home. I was the supply sergeant, so I went into B7 almost every day. I thought I could handle whatever was in there. I thought I was strong enough to resist it. I was wrong. By the time I realized what was happening to me, it was too late. The thing in the cold room had already started making me into something else, something that belonged in that frozen darkness, where the walls whispered secrets and the shadows moved when nobody was looking. I'm Master Sergeant Carol Williams, and I manage supply operations at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson from 2020 to 2024. JBER is a combined Air Force and Army base just outside Anchorage. Big place, lots of equipment to keep track of. Storage room B7 was in the basement of Building 15, next to the main supply warehouse. It was supposed to be a regular storage room for non-perishable items. Tools, spare parts, cleaning supplies, basic stuff that didn't need climate control. But B7 was always cold. Winter, summer, didn't matter. The temperature never changed. We had maintenance check the HVAC system dozens of times, but they could never find anything wrong. The room just stayed at exactly 32 degrees. Most of my staff avoided B7 whenever possible. They said it made them uncomfortable. Too cold, too dark, too quiet. When they had to go in there, they grabbed what they needed and got out as fast as possible. I didn't blame them. There was something off about that room. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on you. And there were sounds, soft whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls. Most people assumed it was just the ventilation system, but I knew better. The whispers were words. Not English, but definitely words. And if you listened long enough, you started to understand what they were saying. That was my first mistake. I listened too long. At first, the whispers just sounded like white noise, like static from an old radio. But after a few weeks of working in B7, I started picking out individual sounds, syllables, patterns. The voices were soft and low, like people talking in the next room. I couldn't make out specific words, but I could tell they were having conversations. Multiple voices, sometimes agreeing with each other, sometimes arguing. I mentioned it to my assistant, Corporal Johnson, but he said he didn't hear anything unusual, just the normal sounds of an old building settling. But I knew what I was hearing wasn't normal. The turning point came in December 2022. I was doing inventory in B7, counting spare engine parts for the helicopters. It was taking longer than usual because the paperwork was complicated, and I'd been in the room for about 20 minutes. That's when I heard my name. "Carol," whispered one of the voices, clear as day. "Carol, we've been waiting for you." I dropped my clipboard and spun around, but the room was empty. Just rows of metal shelving filled with equipment. No place for anyone to hide. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice echoed off the concrete walls. The whispers stopped. Complete silence for about 30 seconds. Then they started again, but louder this time. And I could understand every word. "Don't be afraid, Carol. We're your friends. We want to help you." "Help me with what?" I asked. I felt crazy talking to empty air, but the voices were so real. "With loneliness," they said. "With the cold. With the pain of being alive." I realized I wasn't alone in the room anymore. The shadows on the walls had gotten darker, and they were moving independently of the light, reaching toward me with long, thin fingers made of darkness. I ran out of B7 and didn't go back for 3 days, but the voices followed me. I heard them in my dorm room at night, whispering my name through the walls. Over the next few weeks, the voices got stronger. I heard them everywhere, in my office, in the dining hall, even in the shower. Always the same message: "Come back to us, Carol. Come home to the cold room." I tried to ignore them, but they were persistent. And gradually, I realized they were right about loneliness. I was lonely. I'd been lonely for years, ever since my divorce. The cold room was the only place where I felt like I belonged. I started spending more time in B7. At first, just a few extra minutes during my regular duties. Then I began making excuses to go down there, checking inventory that didn't need checking, looking for supplies that weren't missing. The voices welcomed me back. They told me stories about the base, about the soldiers who had served there over the years, about the ones who had died in accidents or been killed in combat, about how they had all found their way to the cold room eventually. "This is where we wait," they explained, "where we rest between worlds, where the living can talk to the dead." I started believing them. The temperature in B7 felt comfortable now, not cold at all. The shadows felt like old friends, and the voices felt like family. But then, Corporal Johnson noticed I was spending too much time in the basement. He reported it to my commanding officer, who ordered me to take a psychological evaluation. The psych evaluation saved my life. They found signs of severe depression and isolation, plus symptoms that suggested I'd been exposed to some kind of environmental toxin. They transferred me to a different base and sealed off storage room B7 permanently. I never found out what was really in that room. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the voices calling my name. After hearing all of that, would you ever trust being stationed at a remote military base again? These 5 stories are just the beginning. Alaska's military installations hide secrets that go back decades. Soldiers who vanish without explanation. Voices that call from empty rooms. Things that wear human faces but cast no shadows. The military has ways of covering up incidents that don't fit their official narrative, but the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when the people who lived through it decide to speak up. Drop your own military horror story in the comments. I might feature it in the next video. Which one of these stories messed with your head the most? The thing in Hangar 7? The frozen soldier who came back wrong? Or maybe the voices in the cold room that promised to take away the loneliness? Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories from the places where reality breaks down. And remember, Not everything that serves in the military is human.